Yeah. So what you're dealing with right now, we're standing on, what's known as state land here. It's public access, river access, boat landing. Um, but what you're dealing with is Aquila land on this side, and then on the other side too, and there's this state land in the middle. And so, there's more, of our cultural stuff that's on the private properties now.
So
And
you're talking burial mounds. You're potentially talking burial mounds. You're potentially talking the agricultural stuff that's significant not only to your culture but also to the historians and to the archaeologists. Is that correct?
yeah, yeah, and one of the things is we partially don't know. We know our stories about this area, but we haven't, you know, there's not pinpointed locations like here's where this is. We do know there's those features there, but there's different kinds of mounds. So whether those have burials in them or not, that's something that we want studied. So study this, understand what's in this landscape, and then make a decision whether or not a mine should be going in here. Um, but don't grant the mine permits and then without doing the studies.
Makes
So,
sense. So
so
why can't you go and study it?
yeah. So the National Historic Preservation Act, it's a federal law that requires any major federal action. If these types of things existed anywhere under a federal permit, they would have to do consultation with the tribe. It's called Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, and they would study it, and they would take that into account when they're making the decisions. But what they're doing here is on these state permits, they're saying the federal laws don't apply, National Historic Preservation Act. So, sorry, that doesn't apply. We don't have to comply with the National Historic Preservation Act and consult with the tribe and, study these things like we would if it was a federal permit.
Wow. So if my understanding is right, if we were stood on this land and this was in Minnesota and the situation was the same, the process in Minnesota would be that because there was cultural significance, because there was on the native land on your nation, then they would, by law, have to bear that in mind when they were looking at the permitting.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we don't even have to go as far away as Minnesota. On a good day, if I threw a baseball 3 times and hit the other side of this river is Wisconsin, if it was on that other bank, that process would be happening. There's just Michigan and the state of New Jersey have gotten some delegated federal authorities, which these permits are proceeding right now. We don't necessarily agree with it, but they're proceeding through the state process. And these are the only 2 states that, like I said, if this happened in any of the other 48 states, those National Historic Preservation Act laws would apply. They would be required to study this with our involvement in it.
So there's no government to government consultation in this process on that side of it because of it's a state issue at this stage.
Yeah, and the states, saying, we'll talk to you, but that means we're gonna come and tell you at the 11th hour what's important to you, and you don't really have a say so. But we talk to you, so that's consultation, and that's not government to government consultation. As people understand it, it's meaningful inclusion. It's not make the decision. We're gonna come tell you what we're doing, give you the heads up before we give everybody else the heads up. That's not consultation.
So how can people out there, is there any way that people can put pressure on for this to be looked at? Can this maybe be made into a global issue because there's global significance? Because potentially here there could be things that are completely unknown about your own nation that are within those mounds that would be destroyed by this mine going through.
Yeah, I'd say more in the global sense or even in the national sense is looking at these types of delegations and making sure that National Historic Preservation Act applies to it. If the federal government's going to delegate some power to somebody else, these protections have to remain in place to be able to study them. So, so as far as on this project, it's still questionable on. There's unresolved questions on whether this should be a federal permit rather than a state permit, because what you're dealing with is the Menominee River. The halfway point in this river is the other side's all Wisconsin, and this side is Michigan. So you're 150 feet into Michigan, but if there's a catastrophe, that water isn't going to stay on its half of the river. It's going to touch Wisconsin. So, when there's issues with multiple states involved, who should have jurisdiction over that? It's kind of an open question that a lot of people are looking at right now. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for showing us that, and then just let people know again where they can find information from the Menominee Nation regarding these issues.
yes, so it's www.noback40.org. So it's noback40.org.
Thank you very much.